manufactured them for itself. As many of your listeners have learned in the last 2 or 3 years, there's a company in Taiwan called TSMC that has basically taken over the vast majority of cutting-edge chip manufacturing on a contract basis for everyone else. And Intel had really fallen behind. But Intel's ambition is to have a company where it has its own products, it manufactures its own products, but it also wants to manufacture chips for others, just like TSMC does. And that's a long answer, but the short of it is, this is Pat Gelsinger saying, yes, we're going to run the company that way, 2 separate divisions, but no, we're not going to sell off one part to a third party or be acquired by a third party. That's kind of reading between the lines because he was not explicit.
Ed, you have to wonder how much patience investors have right now to see this turnaround play out, because like Tim had mentioned, Intel stock is down almost 60% year to date. So what do we know right now about just how urgent the need for the turnaround is when you think about the share price?
I mean, do we have to wait? For those listening on radio, I'm looking at a chart and the line goes straight up in the air with a 13% next to it. And if you're watching on YouTube, maybe we can put the chart up. And it's an astonishing market reaction because of the pain of the quarter gone that I just told you. And what Intel told us for the final 3 months of this year is, here's a range of revenues we think we're going to have. At the midpoint of that range, it was just slightly ahead of consensus estimates. But the market is, you know, what's the saying, you guys, the investors vote with their feet, right? You know, I think that's the read here. They look at the commentary from Intel and say, you've done some really painful things in the quarter gone. You've let go of a lot of people, cancelled a lot of projects. You had a pretty rough quarter in your PC business where you were once a leader and you've fallen behind. But as we look to the next 3 months and beyond that, there are signs that you might be turning a corner here. And that's great because that gives us a lot to ask Pat Gelsinger about later today.
Don't give away the questions, Ed. I would never ask you to do that. But what is top of mind for you ahead of this conversation, especially given that you got to read a little bit of what Ian's conversation went with him earlier, and then also you get the most recent numbers that we're talking about right now?
Yeah, because of the analyst call as well, and you never know what's going to come up in an analyst call. There's definitely a technology discussion to have here. You know, one of the interesting parts of Qualcomm, or the report that Qualcomm was interested in buying some or all of Intel, is that they had made inroads themselves into the PC market, where Intel had once been dominant. And, you know, a theoretical idea that came out of that is, why would Qualcomm want to buy Intel if they're doing so well on their own? But you could flip that on its head and say, the story of 2024 has been about the AI PC. PC laptops that have new chips in them that are not made by Intel. So when's Intel going to come to the races on that? And in fact, a number of our audience, but also like executives in the world of tech, have asked me to ask Pat about that issue. Because if Intel's so good at PC chips, why is it not doing the latest thing? These are technology questions, but I think we should probably be explicit. Was Intel not approached by some of its peers about an acquisition? Simple stuff.
Ed, in just 3 minutes, we should be getting Apple's earnings reports.
Oh, goodness.
What should people be watching out for the iPhone maker?
Yeah, iPhone 16 and China. Very simple. Leading product, most important market. And that's probably what it will come down to.
Will those iPhone 16s, are they flying off the shelves?
So we've learned in the newsroom a really painful lesson this year, which is treat the third-party data with caution. You guys will probably have done it on the show, right? These stories about some of the market researchers who issue reports saying the first 6 weeks of iPhone 16 sales are down relative to the first 6 weeks of iPhone 15, according to XYZ dataset. Counterpoint Research is one. But there's also evidence that in recent quarters, Apple's actual data has proven the third-party data to be off the mark a little bit. And there's a very interesting phenomena happening in China. Apple won't make its latest generative AI tech available in China for some time until the regulator says it's okay. But there is evidence that the consumer in China is buying the iPhone anyway, in anticipation they might have access at some point to like the latest and greatest software, which I think is so interesting, right? You're buying something without having been able to experience it and like look at it because it's not available in that market.
Yeah, okay, let's talk a little bit about China. Just 30 seconds here, Ed, because these numbers are coming out in 30 seconds.
Sure.
What are the numbers we need to see in China to indicate that Apple is not losing market share to Samsung, Xiaomi, and the like?
Numbers or commentary. So they'll report something for Greater China. They won't be as sort of candid about category-specific stuff, but on the call they will tell us how they think they do or rank in that market.
Okay, we're going to get numbers from Apple in just about 15 seconds. Going into today, shares for the year up 17%, so underperforming the S&P 500. Shares today down 1.8%. We are getting a slew of earnings continuing, and now we're getting Apple results. Bear with me while I bring these up. Fourth quarter revenue meets estimates, coming in at $94.93 billion. Estimates were for $94.36 billion. As we look at the different parts of the reportable categories, services revenue for the fourth quarter coming in below estimates, $24.97 billion. Estimates for $25.27 billion. Fourth quarter earnings per share coming in way below estimate, or not below estimates, below what they were last year, 97 cents versus $1.46 year over year. Fourth quarter revenue, once again, beating estimates, coming in at $94.93 billion. Estimates were for $94.36 billion. Apple also declaring a cash dividend of 25 cents per share. I'm not done.
Not that much.
Okay, let's look at fourth quarter iPhone
dividend.
revenue coming in above estimates at $46.22 billion. Estimate was for $45 billion. Fourth quarter Greater China revenue coming in just shy of estimates, $15.03 billion. Estimates were for $15.8 billion.
And their fourth quarter wearables, home, and accessories, slightly missing estimates, $9 billion. The Mac revenue, $7.74 billion, right in line with estimates. And iPad revenue, slightly below estimates, $6.95 billion versus estimates of $7 billion. The red headline crossing the Bloomberg terminal is that the Apple fourth quarter Greater China revenue missed estimates. It's $15.03 billion versus estimates of $15.8 billion.
Yeah, that's a pretty significant miss right there. Seeing shares bounce around a little. They were higher when these numbers came out. Now they're down about 1.3%. Some of these certainly worth repeating. Fourth quarter iPhone revenue coming in above estimates at $46.22 billion. Fourth quarter revenue coming in at $94.93 billion above estimates, but fourth quarter Greater China revenue coming in below estimates. I do want to go back to Ed Ludlow, who's standing by in San Francisco. He's only had 2 minutes to look at these numbers. China, that certainly seems like a story here, Ed.
Yeah, I mean, wonderful summary. I'm in awe. How do you follow that? But I think that's the simple calculus. Overall, iPhone revenue beat right. Greater China slightly missed. It's not until the analyst call that you get the commentary. It's usually from the CFO rather than Tim Cook that says, actually, by category or product, albeit iPhone, Mac, wearables, here's how we did. And in that explanation, we will find out, did iPhone grow in China or not? It's interesting, the miss is, it's a miss, it's slight. The only other thing that I point out is that you have to read between the lines a bit, and the Apple once again has a new record high of number of installed devices around the world. That's the number of people with an Apple hardware product or device somewhere in the world. It's growing, but where in particular? Which product line? That's kind of the question next.
But Ed, that's an important number, because increasingly as people hold on to these devices for longer, the more of them that are out there, the more people are spending on services like Apple TV Plus, Apple Music, iCloud, and the like. I know I'm certainly not buying new devices right now, but I'm still spending each month quite a bit on Apple, and Apple loves that. It's a high margin business.
Yeah, the timing of this is very interesting. So in the release, they talk about the rollout of Apple Intelligence, which is staggered, as Mark Gurman has reported here at Bloomberg News. Apple Intelligence is the company's proprietary AI or generative AI offering. It's a suite of software tools in iOS that can do various things. This past week, I was offered to upgrade my iOS to 18.1. Then I was put on a wait list for Apple Intelligence. That's a long preamble to say we don't know anything from this release, and you noted that services missed, right? That all this work they put in AI and all of the delay translates to consumers spending more money within the iOS or Apple ecosystem. And I know that many analysts and investors are going to be listening carefully for that.
Let's go through some of these numbers again if you're just joining us. Apple shares down about 1.7% in the after hours. They reported just about 5 minutes ago. Fourth quarter revenue came in above estimates at $94.93 billion. Fourth quarter iPhone revenue came in above estimates at $46.22 billion. That's $1 billion more than what analysts were expecting. Fourth quarter Greater China revenue, though, coming in below estimates. Does that mean the iPhone 16 is a huge success, Ed?
You have to read between the lines again. Until an executive says it definitively on the call, you don't know. But there were other areas that were a bit of a surprise, right? iPad was a surprising miss, despite having released new generation. So take that. Mac revenue came in at 100 million more than the same period a year ago, or maybe sequentially. In line with expectations. So that's not giving a surprise contribution. What's left? We know revenue, services revenue missed, maybe iPhone, piecing it together.
Well, how much of the iPhone 16 was sold in this most recent quarter? Like, do we know?
No, we don't know.
In terms of availability.
So in terms of availability, I'm trying to go through the 10Q and the thing to look at the inventory number, because that's the next place that I look, and I can't find it yet. But come to me with another one, and I'll try to catch up.
Okay, so I'll give you some time to look for that. The reason I always am interested in that is because they announced this thing in September, goes on sale a few weeks later. The quarter ends after only a couple weeks after that iPhone goes on sale. In some years, Emily, they haven't even been able to put the new phone on sale before the quarter ends.
The earnings.
So it's just a question of, okay, how many people were buying the old iPhone versus the new iPhone right here as an indication of how well is that new model selling.
I'll also add, Tim, that we are seeing Apple stock extending some losses. Nothing huge here, and it has only been 6 minutes since earnings came out, but we do now see shares of Apple down about 1.7%, despite the fact that fourth quarter revenue met estimates and was still up 6% year over year, and also that service revenue up 12% year over year, but did slightly miss estimates.
Taking a look now at our live blog. If you have access to this on the Bloomberg terminal, do check it out. Our own Mark Gurman adding to what Ed said, that iPad is a surprising miss, coming out just shy of $7 billion despite the release of that new iPad Pro and iPad Air models earlier this year. That new iPad mini release this month, unlikely to help materially. Mark Gurman also writing that the Mac came in with about $100 million annual revenue increase, meeting Wall Street estimates of $7.7 billion. New Macs released this week should help that product segment in the current quarter. Ed, I want to go back to you. I know you've been diving into that 10Q, speed reading it. What sticks out to you from there?
Well, not the inventories. They're basically very similar to the same period a year ago. So I'm going to spend a bit more time pondering that. A story of the mega caps so far in 2024 has been sweeteners for shareholders. And this is more dry stuff. But you know that your audience on this show, whether they're listening or watching, there are so many different types of Apple investors out there where the role of a dividend or shareholder returns is really important. And so whatever's happening with any given product line or category, remember this: Apple is a cash machine. $27 billion of operating cash flow generated in the quarter. Hence, they're able to return relatively the same $29 billion back to investors. The difference is that in prior quarters, when we've seen a sweetener like a divvy or a boost into a buyback program, that's been a great thing for investors. They've responded positively. And on M's note just then, the stock isn't really responding to that, right? There isn't some sort of relief in that sense, knowing that the bar too is high.
Yeah, Ed, you bring up a really good point that I know you said it's dry, but it's not as dry to me. I interview a lot of portfolio managers.
This is a nice little mix for you, right?
You know, people always talk about cash-rich companies and how those kinds of companies are resilient despite what the macroeconomic environment is doing. If you buy a large company that has a big, strong balance sheet, no matter what the Fed does, no matter what other earnings do, you'll be safe. And I think that sentiment has really carried these mega cap tech stocks this year through all the volatility.
It's important because, again, there's a badge of honor for many that comes with holding Apple stock, whether you're the smallest retail investor or the giant on Wall Street. That's been the case for so long. But at the end of the day, you have, in the world of technology, two main operating systems for smartphones, iOS and the iPhone, and then Android, where a number of handset makers are involved. And it comes back to what's happened to Apple in the quarter just gone. It grew in every market around the world apart from one, Greater China. Tim's question is, did the iPhone do great? Well, the question outstanding is as important as the data that we've relayed to the audience is, we don't know. Let us answer the question on the call, did the iPhone grow in China? And all of these things investors take into account just as much as they do the sweeteners that are put before them.
All right, we're going to hear from Apple executives on the call a little later, Ed. It's notable because it is, I believe, Luca Maestri's last earnings call at Apple. He's going to be passing the torch to his top deputy when the calendar turns to 2025. Is that something that is meaningful to you in terms of how this... There's not a lot of executive turnover at this company. These people have been there for years. Contextualize that for us.
On the one hand, Kevin Parekh, who's his deputy and steps up to being CFO, is a known quantity because he's been there and this was telegraphed. But I've often posted in the Bloomberg Top Life blog, it's the blog we run during these big moments, that it's often Maestri rather than Cook that gives you the information that we'd consider news. It is some more granular detail about performance of a specific product in a specific market, like iPhone in China. He is widely seen as being a master of the margin, right? You think about, I talked about cash generation, but the bottom line in general, and Apple being a highly profitable company with just insane amounts of cash on the balance sheet. You know, Luca Maestri has been a big part of that story. Does Kevin Parekh have the same prowess in that field? Well, it takes some quarters to find out. But, you know, when you're a journalist and an investor, you become familiar with these names and you listen closely when they say things because you know that they choose their words with purpose.
Ed, we're going to give you a break in just a minute, but last question to you is just give us the high-level view of Apple for people who are just joining us right now.
Yeah, in the quarter, Apple posted sales that were about what everyone expected. They grew their sales in every geography around the world apart from China. And iPhone, which is basically everything still for anyone that cares about Apple, beat estimates overall. But there's a lingering question about how it's doing in China because it's such an important market. The next phase, or the forward-looking bit, is the work they've done in AI working for them as a business? Because services revenue came in a bit light. Now, Apple Intelligence has only just this week, last couple of days, been rolling out in markets like North America. It is not available in the EU. It is not available in China. But some explanation, because we don't have it in the release, of how this amazing AI tech is going to drive growth for them in terms of sales and profit is probably the next logical thing to look at.
Ed Ludlow is the co-host of Bloomberg Technology on Bloomberg TV. Do not miss the special edition of Bloomberg Technology tonight at 6 p.m. Wall Street time. Ed's going to be speaking with Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger. And remember, Intel shares just surging in the after hours right now. All right, switching gears a little bit. It's Halloween. Here's what's going to happen tonight. I'm going to rush home, do some trick-or-treating with the kids, and as soon as they go to bed, I'm going to sort of take a lot of their candy, and on its way to the trash can, it's going to stop in this special pile that's for me and my wife, and we're going to sort of, you know, say we'll have a couple of pieces of this candy and then throw the rest away. 20 minutes later, I'm going to still be eating candy.
You know,
because
Tim,
that's how it goes.
My dad was a dentist, and he wasn't even that strict. He's still a dentist, but when I was a kid on Halloween, he was not, you know, taking away the candy on Halloween. Halloween was like an exception to the rule.
Maybe you don't remember. My kids are so young, they're not even going to know tomorrow, I promise. How do we stay healthy, though, around the holidays? Because after Halloween, you got Thanksgiving, then you got Christmas and the December holidays, then New Year's. It's kind of hard when the weather is cold. We go to Dr. Julia Wolfson. She's associate professor in the International Health Department at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. It is supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. Dr. Wolfson, am I just like a mean dad taking away the kids' candy?
Hi, nice to be with you. And no, I would not say you're being a mean dad. I'd say you're being a smart dad and a good dad. you correctly point out, Halloween is kind of the start of this really indulgent holiday season, and Halloween is kind of the, for kids, like that's it, right? They get such a huge haul of candy, and you get to indulge for that one day, and I think that's great, but smart to kind of take it away and maybe exercise some of that same approach for yourself and your wife, and you have your few treats, and then you kind of get rid of the rest of that pile as well.
Okay, but here's something different that I've only come to realize in the last few years. And maybe my head was in the sand, but this stuff is like a lot worse for us than we thought.
Yeah.
So, I mean, candy, I feel like we've known for a long time candy is not great for us. It's very sugary, but it's kind of one piece of a big puzzle of a food environment and sort of a food system that gives us a lot of stuff that's really not good for us. The majority of, if you think about what's on grocery store shelves and all the candy, all the junk food, all those kind of really highly processed products, it makes it really hard to eat healthy. And especially, around the holidays when we have, all the Halloween, followed by Thanksgiving, followed by Christmas, New Year's, all the parties, all of that. And so it's really difficult, and it's really bad for us. We have a really growing body of evidence that our diet is really important for our health over the short and long term, tracking from childhood into adulthood. And we have growing rates of diet-related diseases like hypertension, diabetes, cardiovascular disease that are the leading cause of death among Americans and growing.
So, Dr. Wolfson, how are we supposed to understand what foods to avoid and what is okay? Because a lot of people talk about the dangers of processed foods, but what does that really mean? How can consumers kind of understand, like, what's bad processed and what's simply okay to eat and maybe just, manufactured, but not the bad kind of processed?
Yeah, it's a good point. It's really difficult and it's really confusing because we have, tens of thousands of food products everywhere, just on the grocery store, in restaurants, in all kinds of stores staring us in the face. And it is really hard to navigate. So, ultra-processed foods are, I'd say, kind of right now, where we focus a lot of attention because they're particularly bad in a lot of ways because they are those formulations of foods and beverages that are really made from food products with a lot of additives to enhance taste and texture and appearance and make them especially tasty for us and easy to eat and quick to prepare. But they don't really have a lot of whole food in them. So I'd say a kind of a rule of thumb is where you're looking at a product and you see a list of ingredients that has a lot of words that you're like, I don't know what these words are. These are not ingredients that I'm familiar with or that I would use in my home kitchen. That's probably a sign that this is an industrially processed food that is something that should be avoided or eaten in moderation. In contrast, they're not all bad, right? So some things, like if you think about whole wheat bread on a grocery, sliced whole wheat bread, that's also highly processed, but it has some nutritional qualities, like it's made with whole grains and is perhaps like on a spectrum less bad. So I think, you got to kind of read that food label, look at that ingredient list. When you see a lot of things that you don't know what they are and would never use or cook with them yourself, that's a sign. And then compare that with the nutritional content, looking for, is there a lot of sodium? Is there a lot of sugar? What's the fiber content? What's the protein content? Do we have any whole foods at all here? And make some judgments in that respect. But these foods are everywhere and we all use them a lot. They're really hard to avoid, full stop.
What is the recommended way to talk to children about eating healthy? Because Tim mentioned Halloween and hard. Kids, do you completely restrict candy? How can you kind of teach kids that diet is really all about balance, but there are foods that you should be avoiding more than others? Without
giving the kids a complex too.
Right, and that then finally when you're away, they go crazy because they think that they are not allowed to have it.
Right. I think, it's all, like you use the word balance, right? It's all about balance. It's all about everything in moderation. It's all about mindful eating and listening to your body. So food is not just a source of nutrients or something that's good for our health or bad for our health. Food is part of our culture. It's part of traditions. It's part of joy and love. It's how we celebrate as a family. It's how we celebrate most of our holidays. So we want kids to grow up understanding that and loving and enjoying food and getting to have treats, but everything in moderation. So thinking about, having conversations about what is food that makes me feel good? Is this a real food? Is this a food that is this an apple or a carrot that actually grows, from a farm, or is this something that was made in a factory or something? Having them really engage with what are these things and how do I feel when I eat them? Do I get to gorge myself on candy in Halloween and then have a tummy ache the next day? Maybe they do, and that's not the worst thing in the world, and they learn that lesson for daily life, where I'm not going to then go off and gorge myself on candy all the time and feel bad. So I think it really is about this balance, everything in moderation, and for adults too. Thinking about your diet holistically. Can we go out to a holiday party or to a restaurant and indulge? Sure, but then we want to think about how we're eating the rest of the week as well.
Dr. Julia Wolfson, Associate Professor in the International Health Department at the Johns Hopkins at Bloomberg School of Public Health, supported by Michael R. Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Massar and Tim Stennebeck on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
It is Bloomberg Business Week. That is Emily Grafeo. She is in for Carol Massar today. I'm Tim Stennebeck, and the earnings continue.
Yeah.
Let's start with Apple, just to update everyone. Apple's revenue meets estimates. Sales in China, though, lower than expected. Adjusted earnings of $1.64 a share, top estimates. Shares falling 1.5% right now. We'll get some more from the CFO and probably Tim Cook as well on the earnings call a little bit later. Intel also moving today.
Yeah, they gave a fourth quarter revenue forecast slightly above estimates, and we're seeing that stock a lot higher in the post-market, but of course coming off of a pretty tough year for Intel. That stock down something almost like 60% year to date. They projected a profit of 12 cents a share compared with the 6 cents that Wall Street had estimated, and again, that stock is surging almost 13% in the pre-market. So investors liking that turnaround over there at Intel.
Yeah, shares have given up in the after hours some of that momentum, down up about 7.6% today. The company projected profit of 12 cents a share, as you mentioned. 6 cents Wall Street projected revenue of $13.3 billion to $14.3 billion. Pat Gelsinger, the company's CEO, called the most audacious rebuilding plan in corporate history in an interview with Bloomberg. He told our own Ian King this was a critical period of time for the company. We got a lot done.
I would say overall, even though it's been less than an hour since these two earnings reports came out, it feels less ugly than what we had seen earlier in the week with some of those big tech stocks.
Yeah.
I'm thinking Meta, Microsoft.
The thing is, I mean, I wouldn't even say those were ugly. I think just the expectations were so high.
Yeah.
And the run-up this year has been so much that the stocks were, or the expectations were so high. If there's any sort of miss when it comes to the guidance or the outlook, then the stocks get punished.
Yeah, maybe everyone is already trick-or-treating, so they're not trading these stocks, and that's why Apple is only down something like 1% right now.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Do traders trick-or-treat? Probably not.
With their kids, they do. Yeah. With their kids, they do, absolutely. We had, when Ian Rogers came in, he said they're already closing the streets outside to make way for the trick-or-treaters.
Yeah, I was curious, what streets were they closing? Because
I don't know. I know our
block.
block.
Closing down Lexington Avenue for the trick-or-treaters.
Hey, it's fine. Close the streets for the kids. It's all good. I want to talk a little bit about, go to our live blog on the Bloomberg Terminal. The call starts in just about 5 minutes from now. Our own Mark Gurman notes that, this is the Apple call, analysts should press Apple on its iterative product strategy, how it plans to monetize AI, and what future areas of focus like health, robotics, and XR could actually mean for revenue growth.
Yeah, it's really all about take that CapEx, spend it on AI, and then prove to investors that the strategy is working, and do this all super quickly so that your stock doesn't decline and people have a negative outlook on your stock. And, you know, with Apple, it's interesting that we were talking with Ed Ludlow a lot about the China story. We don't yet have the data on just how many iPhone 16 sales there are and exactly the geographic location of like where all of the sales are coming from, right? We get that.
Yeah. Well, we won't get the numbers, but we'll get revenue. We get revenue for these. They stopped reporting numbers for these the actual individual units, but still investors try to back it out based on what they can glean from the numbers. And we do get some sort of guidance on the call, which starts in just about 3 minutes.
You know, Mark Gurman also brings up another good point. The best news for Apple, he says, is that Google continues to be mediocre in terms of its device launches. Amazon's hardware business has fallen off a cliff. We talked earlier today about kind of the slow rollout of putting AI in its Alexa devices. And people have become disinterested in those products. Also, Samsung doing little more than just chugging along. Microsoft, in terms of compelling hardware products, we haven't heard much from this year. Apple is really the place to go for hardware, at least for consumers.
It is, but as consumers hold onto their phones for longer, then it becomes more important that Apple sells them things that they pay for as a service. So things like Apple Music, fitness, iCloud, those sorts of things. Apple News that they're bundling together so people are still paying, even though they aren't paying Apple for a new iPhone every 2 or 3 years. Mark Gurman noting too in the live blog, in addition to the iPad numbers being concerning, wearables numbers are concerning. He said it feels like the overall wearable segment for Apple is tapering, but it's worth noting two of the bigger drivers there, the Apple Watch Ultra and AirPods Pro, haven't seen meaningful updates in 2 years. One thing that they are also thinking about, I know Mark has reported on this, is updating those AirPods with a more of like a wearable type thing, like Sensors, cameras, those sorts of things.
A camera in your AirPods?
Maybe, I don't know. Sensors, definitely sensors of some sort. I don't know about a camera.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't, personally, I'm off the wearables. I don't want to wear
You don't have AirPods?
Well, I have AirPods, but I don't want to wear an Apple Watch. I don't want my phone attached to my body.
Yeah, I don't have an Apple Watch either.
I don't want to be getting text
I would like
messages.
the sleep data, but I don't want the other stuff.
Right, yeah. Like
People
when I
love
put
their
my
Apple
phone
Watches,
away, I
though.
want to put my phone away.
Yeah.
I don't want it following me.
Yeah, that's same thing has kept me from it.
Katie Greifeld, she's a big watch wearer. Not
She
an
has-
Apple Watch,
she has
but
the Garmin
she's
watch, but-
constantly wearing a watch.
Yeah, she gets all the notifications too on it.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
she's a
so-
busy woman.
Apple shares down about 1%. Moving on over to Intel, shares of Intel are higher right now by 8.4%. Just a reminder, shares surged after the company gave a fourth quarter revenue forecast slightly above estimates, sparking optimism that it's capable of reclaiming some lost market share. Reminder, 6 p.m. Wall Street time. That special edition of Bloomberg Technology. Ed Ludlow interviewing Pat Gelsinger, the Intel CEO. That is going to do it for Bloomberg Business Week. I'm Tim Stenop with Emily Graffeo in for Carol Massar. Thank you, Emily. Bloomberg Balance of Power starts right now.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Kaylee Lyons. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris crisscrossed the Sun Belt with just 5 days to go until the election, and Trump already sowing doubt on the outcome of the vote. We'll have more this hour with Elizabeth Wydra of the Constitutional Accountability Center and our political panel, Alvin Jordan and Maura Gillespie. Plus, as the economy remains in focus for voters casting their ballots, new data shows both inflation and spending picking up ahead of tomorrow's jobs report. And we begin with more on that from the North Lawn of the White House, where National Economic Council Director Lael Brainerd is joining us. Director Brainerd, thank you so much for being here with us on Bloomberg. There's a few ways you could look at this data, one being at 2.1% year over year on headline PCE. We are almost back at the Fed's target. The other would be on the monthly basis of core PCE. It's the biggest jump we've seen since April. So how far away are you from declaring victory?
Look, I think if you look back, it wasn't too long ago that people were saying there's no way we could get to the kind of inflation print that we saw today without a recession. And yet here we are. We've got PCE inflation at 2.1%, just a tad above the target at a time where we just learned that the economy grew close to 3% and unemployment is down around 4.1%. So that is a very good trajectory for the U.S. economy, very sustainable. And, you know, we got some additional data on things like compensation. You put that together with very strong productivity, 2.7% over the last year, suggests that we're on a very sustainable trajectory with moderate inflation back close to target.
Well, and we'll get more on wages specifically tomorrow when we get the jobs report, Director. What would be a concerning jobs figure for this administration tomorrow? It is expected to show a slowdown, but how much are you bracing for?
You know, of course,